This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and Smackdown time is upon us once again. We have the incumbent, the 2018 Razer Blade 15. I say incumbent because we reviewed it first. And now we have the Dell XPS 15 for 2018. That's the model 9570. Both of these are higher-end 15-inch Windows 10 laptops with 6-core CPUs inside the new Intel 8th generation. They have dedicated graphics. They cross over from your high-end 15-inch, could almost be an Ultrabook because they're so thin and light kind of laptop, to being something more performant. We're going to smack them down now. So first off is price, and this is a place where Dell just always wins because they're a huge company with great scale of manufacturing. It comes in cheaper for an equivalent configuration. The model that we have sells for $2,100, and that's the Core i7-8750H CPU, latest Intel 8th generation here for both of these models that we're talking about. 16 gigs of DDR4 2666 megahertz RAM, a 512 gig NVMe SSD, and a 4K glossy touchscreen that secretly supports Wacom AES pen, Dell's active pen, for example. We don't know how long that will go on, though, because Dell doesn't even mention that fact, so they could change display manufacturers. Anyway, that one is $2,100. Now, Razer starts at $1,899. With that one, you do get the same Core i7 processor. You get the same 16 gigs of 2666 megahertz RAM. You only get a 256 gig NVMe SSD, and you get a full HD matte non-touch display. Now, Dell also offers a matte non-touch full HD display as well, which would drop the price down some if you were going to configure it that way. That one's a standard 60 hertz display. Now, the one that we have is the higher end model. That one is $2,599, so this is coming in more expensive than our Dell. This one doesn't have a 4K display, but it does have a 144 hertz fast refresh display, which is nice particularly to gamers, but I can tell you even when you're not gaming, once you get used to that fast refresh display and you don't see web pages doing the schmear thing when you're scrolling, you can kind of get hooked on it pretty fast. Same Core i7, same 16 gigs of RAM, same 512 gig NVMe SSD inside. So there you have it. The Razer is going to cost you a little bit more. If you want that 4K display on the Razer, which I don't believe is actually shipping to customers yet. They sent out a few review loaners. We didn't get the 4K display, but it should be competitive with the Dell 4K display, minus the secret pen feature on the Dell. So what are you getting for that extra money? Let's talk about design and build quality. It's really hard to argue that the Razer Blade 15 isn't one of the most high-end looking, well-built, impeccable looking laptops that's currently on the market. It's up there with the Surface Book 2 and the 15-inch MacBook Pro. It has a unified look, no multiple colors, no multiple finishes. It's hard to find a seam on the thing. It is rock solid. It is just sweetness. It's nice. If you really like high-end stuff, it's got that high-end stuff look. It's only available in matte black. It's an updated matte black finish versus what Razer Blade used to use. It's less fingerprint prone, but it still gets disgusting really pretty fast. The XPS 15 is a nice looking machine and it looks fairly high-end. I don't think they've ever quite gotten the design cues there to put it in that rarefied company of the Surface Book 2 or the 15-inch MacBook Pro. You got a two-tone finish. It's a little lighter this year, the silver finish on the top, which looks slightly grainy. I don't think that has anything to do with quality. I think it's their choice. I think if they went for a more unified metal finish on it, it would look a little classier. It's sandwiched with black in the middle. The interior has a carbon fiber palm rest, which is pretty darn cool, though you got that multiple finishes which disrupt the look a little bit. Okay, maybe I'm being picky, but the only drawback with the carbon fiber finish, which I actually really do like the feel of, is that it too gets icky. At least your ickies are in the inside though, where other people won't see them when it's closed. So Razer wins on that. It's fair, it should, it costs more. When it comes to performance, here's where these two laptops divide, and you know what? It depends on what you want here, so I'm not just going to go poo-poo on the Dell XPS 15, even though it's not as performant as the Razer Blade 15, because it depends on what you want to do with it. For those of you who are just doing some VMs, which really depend on having available cores and having available memory more than it depends on how super-duper fast your laptop is, it's fine. So if you're doing coding, it's good. If you're doing your everyday office stuff, you're streaming video, your occasional Photoshop, your occasional Adobe Premiere Pro, the XPS 15 is fine. Gaming, the NVIDIA GTX 1050 Ti Max-Q, so that's the less performance-oriented version of it, is kind of weak. It will get you in today's AAA titles, but at a kind of watery 40 frames per second for some titles, depends. Far Cry 5 is going to be not really good at all. Fortnite is going to be fine at high, and you'll get 60 frames per second on it. So it's not super strong for gaming, but the worst thing is the cooling is not designed for gaming. Honestly, that's been the Dell XPS 15's problem since this chassis design came out. This is the third iteration of it. It's much like the 15-inch MacBook Pro in that respect. It will run hot, and worse yet, I've had it just reboot, and I'm not the only one. If you search the web for this complaint, it just reboots when you're gaming, sometimes as soon as 3 minutes into a game. And I'm testing games that aren't super hard, you know. I'm not testing Far Cry 5, Overwatch, Fortnite. So there's a GPU stability issue here as well. So for those of you who are heavy lifters, you do actually want to game with this thing and play today's AAA titles, and you expect 60 frames per second or higher, whereas the Dell is going to be at 42 frames per second in Far Cry 5. The Razer Blade 15 with our GTX 1070 Max-Q is at about 118 frames. Wow. Much, much better there. Not only that, the cooling is much more advanced on it because they have a gaming laptop heritage and they've learned lessons from the 14-inch that used to run too hot. You have vapor chamber cooling. You have a cooling heatsink design that doesn't just cover the CPU and GPU, it covers ancillary chips as well. So the thing can handle some gaming. It can handle hours of video editing. It can handle doing Blender projects and not even break a sweat in terms of the CPU and GPU core temperatures there. Okay, so with the Razer Blade 15, whether you get the GTX 1060 or 1070, you're getting something that really can game, that can handle hours-long workstation level loads with 3D rendering, with video editing, with those sorts of things. But here's the flip side of that. So for those of you who say, I'm not even going to really do that stuff so much, you know, maybe the occasional little bit of Fortnite on the Dell, that sort of thing. Well, the Dell is going to run quieter and cooler to the touch, generally speaking, as well. Now, if you're pushing the Dell and you're playing Overwatch, it's going to get pretty darn hot on the underside. But for everyday productivity work, for your occasional Adobe Premiere edits, that sort of thing, it doesn't get that hot to the touch. You might even be able to keep it on your lap, which is pretty neat. Again, sort of more like the 15-inch MacBook Pro experience there. And the fans are a lot quieter because they haven't tuned them to be hypercooling because they know you're really going to hammer it with a lot of work. So a lot of people just want a class act, something that has a really nice build quality, has some beautiful display options, is well built, and they're not going to hammer it. So in that case, you might actually prefer the XPS 15. When it comes to networking, you know, usually we don't talk about this, but some people really hate killer networking. I usually don't have any issues with killer, but Dell is using basically last year's killer 1535 AC card, not the 1550, which actually uses an Intel chipset. And some of you hate killer, so I have to mention that. Both of these have socketed Wi-Fi cards, so you can replace the card if you want. And I have had some problems with the killer card in our Dell, even after various software updates now. The product's kind of mature in terms of that. Sometimes it just disconnects. Sometimes it doesn't resume after sleep. You could change the card. They only cost about 35 bucks, and it's not hard. Razer goes with the Intel 9260 AC, the latest generation Intel card. Surprisingly, even though they're a gaming company, they didn't go with killer. So there's that. When it comes to displays, now they're almost on even ground here because both of them have a full HD matte non-touch display option with 75% of Adobe RGB, full sRGB coverage, and they have 4K touch glossy screen options as well. So with Razer it gets interesting because they have the standard 60 Hz panel with those specs, and they have a 144 Hz option in the full HD matte non-touch too. Like I said, that's really cool for gamers, and it's nice anyway. You just get used to seeing nothing smearing when you're scrolling and you don't see mouse ghosting, and you're like, yeah, nice on the eyes. But Dell fights back because their display is 400 nits of brightness and Razer's is only 300 nits of brightness. Now when it comes to the 4K display options, both of those are glossy and they are touchscreen and they're wide gamut, approaching full Adobe RGB. Pretty sweet. I'm pretty sure they're both using sharp panels, IGZO technology, which means the color accuracy in terms of what the colorimeter sees isn't awesome, but you can calibrate it and get it better. Dell's secret sauce is, like I said, currently it secretly supports Wacom AES active pens. We don't know if that's going to continue since this isn't a feature that they advertise. They're using the same panel as on the XPS 15 2-in-1. Probably makes sense for them to throw the same panel in there. We don't know if they're going to keep doing that or not, so don't count on that 6 months from now. Who knows? When it comes to stability, usually you would think the gaming laptop isn't going to be the one that wins. In this case, it is. The Razer Blade 15 has been pretty bulletproof. I've been using one since they came out, and no blue screens, no unexpected reboots. I've thrown heavy-duty video edits at it. I've played Far Cry 5 way too much and some other games on it, and it's just pretty much rock solid. It's a very clean Windows build. There's no bloatware whatsoever other than Razer's own Synapse 3, which is their control center, so you can control the RGB backlighting on the keyboard, the fan profiles, and also Razer peripherals if you want to use them. There is one bug with the Razer Blade 15 where it sometimes does not charge if you plug it in when the laptop is shut down. This is a bug that they're working on, and I have seen that one happen, and that's a pretty nasty, stupid bug, really. I hope they get that one fixed out. Anyway, the Dell XPS 15, again, it's been on the market a couple of months now for consumers. They were late getting review units out to us US reviewers. So all the updates are installed, the latest BIOS is installed, and it's still not as stable as I would like, which is something I've just noticed with the Dell XPS 15 over the iterations, and clearly this Intel 8th generation CPU is giving everybody a little extra hard time here in terms of PC manufacturers. But besides the killer Wi-Fi issue disconnecting sometimes, the GPU is really where I see most of the problems with it just suddenly rebooting when gaming or pushing it hard, sometimes even in Adobe Premiere Pro. If you're not hitting the GPU much, it's pretty solid, it's pretty reliable there. So how about the keyboards? Well, neither of these is really my favorite keyboard, but I would give the Dell XPS 15 the win here. It has larger keys and a little bit more travel and tactile feel going on, even though it's still really a pretty low travel keyboard. It has white backlighting. The Razer keyboard isn't bad. The keys are kind of small though, which is a little bit weird. We also have the right shift key with the arrow in between issue, but you can remap the keyboard using Razer Synapse for that to make that problem sort of go away. You do get that chroma RGB backlighting that's customizable though, so that's a win, particularly if you're gamer types who like to do that, or for those of us who actually use that feature to make the brightness up and down keys and the volume up and down keys different colors, because for some reason the multimedia keys are not backlit on the Razer keyboard. Trackpads on these are very similar. They're Microsoft Precision trackpads. I like them both quite well. Speakers on these are both equally mediocre. For 15-inch gaming / multimedia / impressive laptops, they both have fairly lacking bass and just okay volume. When it comes to upgrading and servicing the internals, these are identical. You have 2 RAM slots inside. You have one M.2 SSD slot. You have a socketed Wi-Fi card and a battery once you unscrew the bottom cover, which is not hard on either of these. If you have a Torx T5 screwdriver, you could unscrew the battery, disconnect it, and put in a replacement as well. So that's pretty even, and repasting the CPU and GPU, the heatsink, isn't too hard on either of these. Dell is the winner on battery life. It has a larger 97 watt-hour battery versus the 80 watt-hour battery in the Razer Blade. Well, that's going to be a big difference in capacity there. Also, it's going to depend on whether you have a 4K or a full HD display. For either of these, you're going to see a couple of hours difference in runtime. But typically, the full HD Dell XPS 15 runs us about 9 hours on a charge, sometimes a bit longer. Our Razer Blade, obviously, this has a smaller battery, full HD display, and it's more like a 7 to 8 hour laptop. Sometimes 8.5 if you're really doing light work. So yeah, winner Dell. The XPS 15 ships with a more compact 130 watt adapter. The Razer Blade needs more power for the GPU, so it ships with a 230 watt adapter for the GTX 1070 Max-Q version. Last one is support and availability. Dell is a huge company. They're just about in every country in the world. You got service, you have support, so that stands in their favor there. They sell on-site warranties if that's your gig and you don't want to be sending it in. As PC support goes, their support's pretty decent. I mean, nobody's happy with any PC support, honestly, but it's pretty fun. Now, Razer Blade had a terrible customer support reputation, and as I mentioned, just before the Blade 15 launched, they so totally turned that around. It's actually quite good now. They're responsive, they'll send you replacements, they'll fix things. So there you have it, the XPS 15 versus the Razer Blade 15. Obviously, like I said, the Dell is going to be the less expensive model. That's their thing. They come in just under the competition in terms of pricing, and they're good at that, and they sell high volume. They can do that. And even though it's the loser on performance and on cooling effectiveness, that doesn't mean it's a bad laptop. It just means it's for a different target audience. The Razer Blade 15 is targeted more obviously at gamers, as we found out, and people who are using true mobile workstation kind of professional kind of software out there. You're doing 3D rendering in Blender. You're doing a lot of video encodes, that sort of thing. The XPS 15 is for those of you who do light to moderate work. You know, sometimes you do some video editing. You're using some VMs to do some software development, everyday kind of stuff. It's absolutely fine for that, where you don't need that super duper cooling. The stability when gaming on the Dell XPS 15 is, however, terrible. If you're into gaming, gee, Razer is a gaming brand. Duh. Go with the Razer, obviously. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.